Welcome to White Space, our weekly look at the data center industry, and this week in its 50th edition. So, let's start with international politics and Max.
Yes, so as you all know, and everybody knows, Russia sort of like took over a part of Ukraine, well, a couple of parts, but we're interested in Crimea, Sevastopol, sort of like for a long time has been a hub for the Russian Navy. They want to keep that hub. They invaded. Some say, like local separatists. Some say regular Russian army. Nobody knows. It was kind of confusing for a while.
Yeah.
Anyway, but Russians, after they've established a foothold there, they started launching infrastructure projects that integrate Crimea into the fabric of Russian Federation. And this is very interesting because under the Russians, it was still, until very recently, actually a couple of days ago, the Republic of Crimea. Now it's officially a part of Russia. And the government of Crimea has already started building state data centers there. And the government of Crimea is obviously pro-Russian. And this is just like their way to put their mark on the part of the country now. And it's just like, like roads, railways, and now it's data centers, critical infrastructure.
Yes, so that's putting their stamp on the country, building a data center.
That is how you invade, yes.
Yes. Somewhat less dramatic. There's Canada. You can rely on Canada to be less dramatic. But similarly, there's data sovereignty going on there to some extent, and consolidation.
The Canadian government is very keen to make sure that its most important data stays within the borders of Canada. There were published an interesting story a while back, basically covering the fact that some of the data that leaves Canada actually sometimes is diverted around, comes back in through via the US. So they might have a bit of a hard time ensuring that this data actually does fulfill all the data residency criteria. But basically, the Canadian government has published an advisory strategy for making the right cloud approach, so advising top secret and secret data to be stored within the country's borders and classified information to be stored in the cloud but within Canada. This document is not legally binding at all. It's a kind of a consultative document which has been published for public comment, so they're welcoming comments up until the end of September, but obviously the Canadian digital strategy has come under quite a lot of public scrutiny because of the way that the Shared Services Canada, which is an IT organisation for consolidating a lot of the Canadian data centres down into one, they've had all sorts of difficulties with that.
But it's sort of like analogous to problems they have in the US, so over time, over budget, and data centers are actually multiplying.
I guess so, yeah. You could absolutely say that.
Okay. Which brings us to the US government, which this week finalised its data centre optimisation initiative. No big news here because this was there was a draft of it came out in March, and this pretty much confirms what that was saying. The idea is, though, that it will reduce the annual costs of government data centres for the federal government by 25%. Through a directive which you could summarise as no new data centres, everything in the cloud, unless you've got a special reason to build your own data centre.
And interestingly, they also want to just have better data on what they're doing. So make sure we actually have an understanding of what the PUE of this centre is, because they don't surprisingly have all that data. So they just want to find that out. So
it's sort of like put more sensors in, put some kind of DC in, and that kind of stuff.
At the very least, work out how much the thing is costing. Don't let bureaucracy and just the scale of government let these things get lost.
Sticking with the international flavour, over in Korea.
Yeah, it's quite an interesting story. So South Korea, Google. Pretty much most places you throw a world map, Google owns that area. They have the search engine dominance and the map dominance. Not so much in South Korea. And the problem is they want high resolution, detailed maps from the South Korean government, which other South Korean competitors do have. But South Korea say, if we give you this, you need to blur what we want blurred, you need to say these islands are our islands, whereas the problem is in some of these islands, Japan says they're their islands, and Google obviously has a global focus, so they're concerned that if they were to say, yes, we'll do that, then Japan would say, what about us? And it would just get worse, more confusing, as we've seen with Google in Crimea. But one way the Koreans have said, okay, what you should do at the very least is build a data center in South Korea, because you're not paying taxes possibly as much as you should. You're not abiding by our sovereign laws. Set up here, we can see what you're doing, you can store it here. And Google, they say, even if we were to build it, the way our maps work is just on the cloud, some of it's processed all around the world, we can't do it like that. So it's a very interesting case of a big global corporation against a powerful country that obviously has serious national security issues with North Korea just right there. And I'm not really sure how it can be resolved.
Yeah, and plenty of domestic competitors, right?
Yeah.
So there's the company which produces Line, the messaging app.
Yeah, exactly. Naver,
Yes.
and yeah, Naver Maps. We did an interesting thing. We used a VPN to pretend we're in South Korea. Went on Google Maps there, and you go to an island and it's blurred out. You go to on UK Google Maps, you can see it beautifully, and it says this is a disputed island between Japan and South Korea.
It's something that looks suspiciously like military bases there.
Exactly, and you can see those things, and you can understand why South Korea doesn't like the fact that we can just see that, but you can also understand why Google doesn't want to bend over, because when they start doing that, it's just a Pandora's box, and where does it end?
Sebastian, you've been hearing about AIs taking over a security event.
Yeah, it's a strange story of DARPA. Obviously, they're known for putting a bit of money in to promote quite early research in areas. Obviously, they mainly go on about that they were led to the internet, but they've done other things, and self-driving cars and things like that have spawned out of DARPA. And what they're doing at the moment, it just happened, was a cyber challenge. And rather than a normal, just bunch of hackers all trying to hack each other, trying to hack a system, it was they had to develop AI to do it for them, and then they had to leave. They didn't know what the software was going to be that it would have to hack. There'll be 7 different AIs. They would be each in charge of the software, having to protect their own software, patch it, while hacking everyone else. So it's just a little AI war going on. Really, really weird, and yeah, it's creepy but also amazing, because in the future, you know, if AI can do all your cybersecurity for you, can instantly check a system, patch all the holes, that'd be wonderful.
But what's the data center angle?
Well, so DARPA built a data center at the event in 29 hours, liquid cooled, lovely looking thing. We have some nice pictures.
Yep.
And yeah, they set that up and got all these AI to go. And then of course, these cybersecurity bots eventually will be used in data centers, is the hope, to protect our increasingly digitalized world.
What I like about that story, though, is they knew they will have spectators who are maybe, not technically clued up. So they developed visualizations that could literally, like, this is our outer perimeter, this is our inner perimeter, and basically how to show, these AIs competing and hacking each other. And yeah, apparently that worked very well, and we can expect more of that.
Did they have people from Hollywood doing that?
Video games company.
Video games company.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that'll go on their CV, and we'll probably see those visualizations in games and movies.
Yeah, I mean, they've said that they've literally said this is the start. We want to do more of this. We want to work out, is there a better way? Because in the future, if you do have incredible AIs that are doing these wars, humans, even if they are good hackers, might not be able to understand what's happening. There needs to be some visualization way for people to understand what's going on. So it's an interesting area to watch.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we've heard a bit more, another development at the Open Compute project to do with Open Racks and their big new member that joined earlier this year, Google.
Yes, in March, at the Open Compute Summit in California, Google finally joined the Open Compute, the sort of the last of hyperscalers. It was, you could say, inevitable. And straight right there at the event, I mean, you've been there. So
I was there, yes.
They said that we're going to develop this rack architecture that's going to be 48 volts throughout. Mm-hmm. And it's going to have a lithium-ion UPS right in there, and it's going to have a more shallow sort of like form factor, so you can build high-density systems but put them in smaller data centers, which is very interesting, because usually Open Compute is only interested in the needs of the large data centers. And this thing, while still useful for the large data centers, will also be useful for small data centers.
All right.
So in March they said they're working on it, and yesterday they've more or less released the finished specification, and they're sort of like they're basically canvassing for input from the open compute community. If everything goes according to the plan, the project will go back to the foundation will approve it, and then it becomes an official open compute certified project.
Mm-hmm.
And why Google is doing this? One, Google says it's saving about 30%, it's improving its server PUE by about 30%, saving millions of dollars on electricity. But, I mean, as is often the case with open compute, the underlying motive here is perhaps that sort of like 48-volt kit is still pretty expensive, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a non-traditional model, and they want to make it cheaper for themselves. So more people use it, it becomes cheaper, Google is happy.
Good. And finally, Vertiv.
Oh!
You know how Emerson is spinning off its network power division and giving it a new name, no longer Emerson Network Power, it's going to be an independent thing called Vertiv. Well, maybe it isn't. Or maybe it is. What's actually happened is, instead of just spinning it off, it's selling it to a venture capital firm called Platinum Equity, who've paid $4 billion for the thing, which actually is apparently about as much as the turnover of the company, so it's a fairly high price to pay for it. This has a whole conglomeration of data center power brands like Liebert and Trellis and Chloride and Metshore, we shall wait and see what Platinum decides to do with them.
But I like the notion that these are by no means underperforming businesses. I mean, they're sort of like, Emerson is getting rid of them because they're sort of like, it has even better performing businesses. But these are all great. I mean, Trellis, Liebert, these are well respected and they're bringing in presumably a lot of money, making a lot of profit.
Well, it's still, revenues have been going down. So while it is bringing money, it is on perhaps not the best pathway at the moment. So maybe on its own, focused, leaner, maybe it can be a bit meaner.
And some people say that they're not that well integrated as businesses, so there's sort of, when a venture capital fund gets involved, it might get broken up. That's a possibility. So we'll look forward to hearing more about that in the future as we move into the second half century of white space. Thank you for joining us.